Wait, how does this work?
You just press the button.
This one?
No, not that one.
You're listening to Press the Button, a Ploughshares Fund podcast dedicated to nuclear policy and national security.
Everything seems impossible till it happens.
Everyone would be affected by a nuclear war.
Our government is planning to spend trillions of dollars to develop new nuclear weapons that we don't need.
You can't win a nuclear war.
We are all experts on nuclear weapons because we are all going to be affected by those nuclear weapons.
And here are your hosts, Joe Cirincione and Michelle Dover.
And we're back. Hi, Michelle.
Hello, it's been so long.
I know, we haven't done this together for weeks.
I know. Let's just rub it in that we travel.
Yeah, all over the world. All over the world. Well, welcome to our 32nd episode. Obviously, I'm Joe Cirincione, and
I'm Michelle Dover.
And we have a special announcement to make in just a little bit, but we'll get to that. Michelle, what do you got queued up for the nuclear news this week?
So Early Warning's going to cover the Trump administration's efforts to discredit civil servants. We're seeing it both on impeachment and on Iran, as well as a recent ICANN report about U.S. universities' involvement in nuclear weapons production.
Do I get to make an editorial comment here? This disgusts me. The way the Trump cult is turned against professional foreign service officers, civil servants, career. I mean, we haven't seen anything like this since Scooter Libby and outed Valerie Plame because they objected to her husband Joe Wilson's criticism of the Iraq War. And this is what we're seeing, except it's not even a cause. It's all about Trump.
Well, that was Ambassador Yovanovitch's point, right? She says, I do serve at the pleasure of the president, but why did he need to smear my reputation?
Right. Well, you'll get into that more in Early Warning. Later, we ask a question apparently concerning nuclear terrorism submitted by a listener in Vancouver. I haven't seen this yet. Have you?
Yes, I have. You'll enjoy it.
Okay, thanks. And last week I spoke with Colleen Moore and Tristan Guyette of Beyond the Bomb, but this week Michelle leads the interview.
Yes, I talked to Ambassador Laura Holgate over at the Nuclear Threat Initiative and the co-founder of Gender Champions in Nuclear Policy.
Have we celebrated the birthday on air yet?
This is the week. This is the week we celebrate. Happy birthday, Gender Champions.
I got to say, this is one of the things I think I'm proudest of what we've been able to do is to partner with good people to lead this new effort, an extremely successful effort on ensuring gender equity in our nuclear policy organizations, including, this is an amazing announcement that was made just last week, that we have our first laboratory. The Los Alamos Nuclear Laboratory has joined the Gender Champions for Nuclear Policy. So we're about gender diversity, gender equity, not just in the NGO world, not just in those of us who want to get rid of nuclear weapons, but those of us who make nuclear weapons. In the whole field, we should be balanced from left to right, from top to bottom.
Absolutely.
Finally, by now you've probably seen or heard about our brand new Press the Button mugs. These are pretty cool. And people have been asking, how can we get one? Well, I'm not going to give you one. Michelle, are you giving anybody a mug?
No.
Only our guests.
Yes.
Up until this point. Well, we're going to tell you in a little while how you can get a special Press the Button mug. We'll be running a special campaign on Giving Tuesday. That's December 3rd. So to you, our loyal listeners, listen, and we'll tell you next week how you can get a Press the Button mug of your very own.
But first, as always, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share if you like what you hear.
The clock is ticking. Let's go.
And now, Early Warning. Early Warning. Early Warning. Early Warning. A 7-minute synopsis of this week's nuclear news.
Thank you, Del. I'm your host, Michelle, and today I'm joined by two of my Ploughshares colleagues, Mary Kaszynski, Deputy Director of Policy here at Ploughshares, and John Carl Baker, Senior Program Officer and Nuclear Field Coordinator. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
So, you know the drill. 7 minutes to cover the news, and the clock starts now. Mary, this week our news was defined by impeachment and the public hearings that we finally got to see. And it really feels like the narrative is becoming one of the Trump administration versus career civil servants. You actually have a story about this as well in our space. How does Brian Hook fit into this narrative?
Yeah, so this week the State Department Inspector General released a report, the product of months of investigations, confirming that Brian Hook and some of his colleagues at the State Department have been sidelining and pushing out career civil servants because they're being questioned for their loyalty to President Trump and because of their ethnic heritage. So in particular, there was a woman of Iranian heritage, a career civil servant who had a stellar record, stellar performance reviews, who had worked under the George W. Bush administration as well as the Obama administration. She was pushed out by Brian Hook and some of his colleagues because they thought, she might be promoting Obama's Iran deal. They thought that she was not towing the line and not promoting the Trump administration's policy. Again, this was outrageous. They brought her heritage into question, also completely unethical. And the State Department Inspector General confirmed this behavior.
And recommended disciplinary action. I mean, Brian Hook is the special representative on Iran. That's a pretty high-level position.
Yeah, absolutely. And for state to make that recommendation, that's huge. Now, I think the question is whether Secretary Pompeo will act on this recommendation, and that's a very likely no. Pompeo was not involved, as far as we know, in this particular case, but under both Pompeo and his predecessor, Secretary Tillerson, there's been this really unfortunate hollowing out at State Department. Again, like the impeachment, a distrust of these civil servants and a politicization of the overall environment at state.
What's the rationale for this distrust? I mean, does this go back to the Trump administrations and some Trump supporters' idea of a deep state hidden in the federal government somewhere that seeks to undermine the Trump presidency?
I think that's exactly right. There is a distrust of, that there is this deep state or some sort of shadow diplomacy, which is ironic considering what's happening with impeachment right now and the fact that, there was a shadow operation being run out of the White House.
Right.
But I also think it gets to this overall disdain for diplomacy that I think is evident throughout this administration, and a disdain for diplomacy and a preference for force and coercion.
Well, and not to mention a culture that's permeated with paranoia and qualifications that are based on loyalty really don't make for principled diplomatic negotiations.
And I think it's really unfortunate that we're seeing the results of that in terms of, U.S. foreign policy across the board. Lots of national security crises that have been created by this administration.
Speaking of national security crises created by this administration, our next story is on the International Atomic Energy Agency, having just released its latest report on its verification of nuclear activities in Iran. What were the results?
Yes, so the IAEA confirmed in a report that leaked this week that Iran has made a number of new breaches of the JCPOA limits. They've not only installed some advanced centrifuges, but they've started enriching and stockpiling uranium with those advanced centrifuges, and they are also enriching to slightly higher levels. They're going up now to 4.5%.
What does this mean for the JCPOA?
So the future of the JCPOA is unfortunately very bleak. Iran set another deadline. There's another 60 days for the U.S. and the rest of the P5 to provide Iran with some economic incentives, come back into compliance with what they promised Iran under the JCPOA. And if Iran doesn't get that, they will take additional steps that could be more serious, could potentially be irreversible. I think the real question is, though, how the Europeans in particular, as well as the Russians and Chinese, will respond to these potential new violations that Iran may take in the beginning of January. So far, the rest of the P5 has made some that they've encouraged Iran to come back. They've said these are very serious steps and they do risk undermining the JCPOA, but they have not taken the step of snapping back the UN sanctions that were in place prior to the JCPOA. If they take that step, and again, depending on what Iran does, the P5 could take that step very soon. The JCPOA would go away. There would be no UN Security Council resolution endorsing the JCPOA, and all of the previous UN sanctions on Iran for its nuclear activities would come back into place.
Thanks, Mary. So, John Carl, our last story. The International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons just released a report detailing how U.S. universities are involved in nuclear weapons production. What did they find, and what are the recommendations?
Well, they found that there are very close links between American universities and the production of nuclear weapons. They found that there are nearly 50 universities across the United States that are supporting the nuclear weapons complex in some way. Sometimes that's through, in a very direct way, through direct management of one of the national laboratories. But sometimes it's in kind of indirect ways, through institutional partnerships, access to research facilities, and so forth. But it shows that nuclear weapons production isn't just something that happens in a few isolated labs spotted around the United States. It's something that a lot of different institutions, including universities, have a stake in.
Does the report have any recommendations for students or those who want to learn more?
It does. I mean, it recommends that students get involved, that they demand transparency, that they support disarmament policies, and they support organizations like ICANN that are pushing to have the nuclear armed powers reduce their weapons, and ultimately, hopefully, they'll eliminate them.
So with the last 30 seconds, what do you think is the driver for U.S. universities to be involved?
Well, there's probably a bunch of factors, and universities have been involved in the production of nuclear weapons for a while. But I would say that something I suspect is involved is funding. Since the financial crisis, state funding of universities has dramatically declined. And if the federal government comes along and says, hey, here's some funding to get involved in nuke production, why would you turn it down?
And on that note, our 7 minutes are up. John Carl, Mary, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
We get letters, we get stacks and stacks of letters.
And now our question and answer session. Joe, are you ready for this?
Let's go.
So today's question comes from Nick, who is from Vancouver, and he has questions about the importance of missiles in delivering nuclear warheads for a state like North Korea. He says, while I understand that trade barriers are in place, I find it difficult to believe that a state such as North Korea could not smuggle a few warheads anywhere they wanted. What is preventing a state like them from deploying nuclear bombs in this manner? How could they be detected in a shipment of goods leaving the country? And I think implicit in this, why develop missiles if you have these other methods available?
Wow. Excellent question. Excellent question, Nick. And I'm sorry that you have to think about this living in a city as beautiful as Vancouver, but you know what? You are vulnerable to North Korean nuclear weapons smuggled in on ships. And for years, this was the primary means of delivery we feared from North Korea. They don't have to develop ICBMs, which after all are risky. They've developed 2 ICBMs, which we believe can reach any spot in North America and are capable of carrying nuclear warheads. They have developed a nuclear war that's capable of going on a missile and could probably survive reentry. But there are some uncertainties associated with this. So if you wanted to be assured of hitting the United States, would you really use a missile? Maybe not. You could just smuggle it in on a cargo ship. You could FedEx it into Vancouver Airport or Baltimore, Washington Airport, for that matter. Sam Nunn used to say if a terrorist wanted to get a nuclear weapon in the United States, they put it in a bale of marijuana. We know we can't stop that. And that is true. Think of all the smuggling that goes on in the United States. Really, if you're a small nation or a terrorist group, you've got to consider ship or plane delivery as being the more valuable. But there is a prestige element to having nuclear missiles. It makes you one of the big boys, that you can reach out and hit somebody not in 10 hours or a week that a ship might take you or a plane might take you, but in 30 minutes. That's why this podcast is timed for 30 to 40 minutes, is to give you some idea of the flight time of an ICBM, how long it would take a missile to fly from North Korea or Russia or China to any place on North America. So I'm with you, man. I'm with you. There's a lot of ways North Korea could get a weapon in. And if we ever were to develop effective missile defense, something I personally believe will never happen, that is the way people would go. They would just go under, around, or sabotage our defense systems to make sure that bomb got where they wanted it to be.
Well, and I think the other thing I would add to this, too, is, the U.S. Does have quite a few programs to try to build the detection equipment placed abroad to actually try to determine if there are goods being smuggled, in this case, nuclear weapons being smuggled. But in terms of, it's called second line of defense for a reason, it's not guaranteed then. And your point about, the smuggling that goes on every day, I think is a great one to show that we can't control that. My cousins are longshoremen in LA, and they have talked about just the sheer number of goods that travel through that port. And for me, that's what I like to think of when I think of problems like this. It's much better to address the problem diplomatically than to hope that a detector is going to find it.
That's exactly right. And the detectors, remember, are portal monitoring systems, meaning the cargo has to be taken off the ship and go through the portal. And there's ways to mask the signature, especially for plutonium and uranium. It's not that radioactive. It doesn't have that aggressive a signal. So you put it in a load of cat litter, for example, or bananas,
That's my favorite.
Or toilets, all of which have natural radiation that's emitted to them and set off false alarms thousands of times a day at these portal monitors. So one way, you mask the nuclear weapon by putting it in something people expect to set off a false alarm. That's one. Number two, you just set it off in the port. I mean, nuclear weapons are like horseshoes, close counts. You don't have to get it into the city. A powerful enough bomb will blow up the city from the port.
Another week, another question. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Michelle.
And now, a special announcement from Ploughshares Fund Senior Advisor, Terry Greenblatt.
Hi, I'm Terry Greenblatt, Senior Advisor at Ploughshares Fund. We're ensuring that women's voices, values, and feminist analyses have a significant impact in nuclear security discussions and policies. I'm proud to say that through a new project called the Women's Initiative, Ploughshares Fund is specifically investing in, amplifying, and expanding the range of perspectives addressing our world's greatest nuclear challenges. The Women's Initiative is helping create a world where people and the planet are safe and free from nuclear threats. We're promoting the inclusivity and the bold thinking that our peace and security field has been historically lacking. So please consider dedicating a gift to the Women's Initiative today. Visit ploughshares.org/Women's Initiative or phone 415-668-2244. Do it today and dedicate a gift to this critical project. Thank you.
Welcome back to the interview segment of Press the Button. I am one of your co-hosts, Michelle Dover, and today I am joined by Ambassador Laura Holgate. Laura, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Michelle. Great to be here.
For those of you who've been around the nuclear field, you probably know Laura's bio even better than I do. It's quite long, but I just want to highlight that you just have this incredible career, both in government service and outside government, Department of Defense, Department of Energy, National Security Council. You were pivotal to the Nuclear Security Summit process, an ambassador to the IAEA in Vienna. You now work as the Vice President for Materials Risk Management at NTI. But today, we're going to talk about something a little bit different.
Or maybe not so different.
So let's dive right in. I'm just so proud to say that we are co-founders of Gender Champions in Nuclear Policy.
That makes me really proud too, Michelle.
Which has just celebrated its first birthday.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday. Don't worry, you won't hear us sing. But Laura, can you tell the listeners a little bit about what Gender Champions in Nuclear Policy is?
So great to be here with you. And for one thing, Gender Champions in Nuclear Policy has been a great way to get to know you better and to work more closely with Ploughshares. And so I am super grateful for that. But what it is a vision that I know you and I share, is a vehicle to enhance the presence, the voice, and the impact of women in the nuclear policy field. And it builds upon decades of work that we have been doing as individuals, in informal conversations, in more formal structures such as Women in International Security and other women-oriented collectives, of what I call side out and bottom up work to enhance gender balance, to network among women, to build our skills, to connect our humanities, to share maternity wardrobes and hairstylists.
So true.
And to while being professionals and caring deeply about the policy, the nuclear policy missions that we've had the good fortune to work on and contribute to. And so that all being said, and that it's been at least a generation or two of that kind of informal work, we still find extreme underrepresentation of women in the nuclear policy field, especially at mid and top levels. And what that says is that we still have an institutional problem in the nuclear policy field that is holding women back, that is preventing our best work collectively. And so how do you change an institution? You got to start at the top. And so the inside of Gender Champions, which is borrowed shamelessly with gratitude from the International Gender Champions concept that I had the privilege to be part of, and I can say more about that later. What it does is it starts at the top of our institutions in the nuclear policy field, at think tanks and advocacy groups, at foundations who fund them, at professional organizations whose members work on this area. And any other organization that is working in the nuclear policy field or whose members work in the nuclear policy field, for those leaders to make a personal commitment to move their organization towards gender balance. And so it's really about pledges in public, about accountability to those pledges, because we ask that each gender champion make a common pledge. They all make the same pledge that has to do with visibility of women. And what's one of our main stocks in trade in the nuclear policy world? It's panels. It's representation. It's who gets to be an expert. And so what we ask the gender champions themselves to do is to say that they are not going to participate in single gender panels. And that's a really powerful statement, and it really builds on the cachet of those top leaders of these organizations, who everyone wants to come speak at their conference, at their workshop, at their event, to say, well, I'm going to do that under certain circumstances. I'm going to ask whether or not there is balance on the panel that I've been invited to be part of. If there's not balance, I'm going to suggest some women or men who might help make it balanced. And if I'm not comfortable that a solid effort has been made, or if someone else can participate effectively, I'm not going to do it. Now, there still may be times, because the heads of organizations have representational responsibility. Sometimes they're the only ones who can give a message, where the head of an organization who is a gender champion has to be on a single gender panel. But those should be rare and declining. And so we ask the gender champions to keep track of their appearances on single gender panels and to report on that.
Well, and I think when we first talked about this, I think this was one of the most striking elements for me, because this topic, I mean, especially in the nuclear field, the concept of a manel, all male panel, has now become just kind of our everyday parlance. And so hearing something of, maybe the answer is to just not be on a manel. It really just kind of felt groundbreaking. Maybe it shouldn't, but such a clear and easy way to track it, to understand where you are, I think is really important.
Yeah, and it goes alongside the calling out of manels. And when we see that this goal of panel parity or diverse panels or whatever is taken seriously, that the quality of the conversation actually goes up. And I think the gender champion partners at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace would say that. And they've been tracking their own panels and the balance of those panels over the last 3 or 4 of their conferences. And they've seen it go way up. And I would say, having attended almost all of them, the quality just gets better every year.
And this is not just about panels.
Exactly.
Right?
So in addition to the panel pledge, each gender champion makes 3 additional pledges that are customized to their own organization, to where they are in their gender balance journey, to the personality and style of the leader. And these pledges can run the gamut, but they're all supposed to be so-called SMART pledges. So specific, measurable, action-oriented, realistic, and time-bound. And these pledges are published on our website. So there is an opportunity for the leaders to say what they value in their organization, and to have the world look at how they're doing in completing those pledges.
And for all of those who are wondering, you can go to www.gcnuclearpolicy.org, click on the champions, click on their pictures, and all of those pledges will pop up.
That's right. So we have, 43 champions?
44.
Yes. And they come from all over the nuclear policy field. Many of them are Washington-based, but not all of them. We have a little cluster building in London. We have about 3 in Vienna. We have several on the left coast. So this is really not geographically bounded. That's one of the benefits of it.
And it's a variety of institutions. The listeners just heard us, kind of switch the numbers. And that's because, I don't know about you, I'm so excited about the most recent edition.
Yes. So our most recent edition is Tom Mason, the director of Los Alamos National Lab. And if there is a more traditional, storied part of the nuclear policy community than Los Alamos National Lab, I don't know what it is. But it's challenging for all of the kind of stereotypical reasons. Obviously, lots of math and tech, where there's this perception that women are underrepresented. But when you see who's coming out of the grad schools, the pipeline is pretty full on the front end. But what happens at the national labs and at institutions all over, that pipeline starts to leak. And so by the time you get to mid-career, to senior management, to the very top positions, it is so male.
I'm glad you brought this up, because I wanted to go back to something that you started by saying, where you push back on, we're not talking about something different than the rest of the work that you've done in your career on nuclear security. And so tell me a little bit more about why this issue matters to you, how you've seen it play out, and what role it plays in creating better nuclear policy.
Well, there's a lot of different ways you can get at this. And one of them is simply from the fairness point of view. Nuclear policy affects all of us, whatever walk of life we come from. It has to do with how nations assign their resources. Money spent in certain ways isn't available for other resources. It has to do with the way foreign policy is conducted and how that affects every human on the planet. It has to do with how weapons are made and built, and the legacy of their development, including testing, where we're talking about specific effect on individual human bodies and the communities in which that activity takes place. And obviously, in the case of the unthinkable, an actual use of nuclear weapons is not going to discriminate between those that are affected. And so we all have a stake in this topic. Similarly for nuclear energy, which is also part of the nuclear policy process that we're thinking about. And so the effects of climate change affect us all. The potential for nuclear energy to be misused in support of acquiring nuclear weapons. I mean, all of these things are global in their effect. And to suggest that half the population is not present for the conversation makes that conversation illegitimate just from the start. But then you get to the very practical point, and we know from study after study after study that diverse groups make better decisions. So one of our other gender champions, Maggie Feldman-Pilch, is fond of talking about competent diversity because, of course, no one's suggesting that by diversity we reduce the competence of whatever group or community we're talking about. But by adding the women that we know are out there who have done the work, who have, earned the insights, who have a lot to say about these issues, we're losing out. The conversation is less good. The decisions are less effective. They are less durable. They are less practical. And that's not because of some categorical perception of all women are blah. But it's about when you have as many different perspectives around the table wrestling towards the right answer, that answer is better.
Yeah, you avoid groupthink. I think this is, one of, in this work that we've been doing, we've picked gender, right? That's an area that I think is sometimes an easier topic to start from. But it's really been, for me, a journey to understand how just starting from that point, and it opens up this conversation of, who else is being excluded.
Right.
Whether it's race, whether it's class, whether it's geography, education, it just, suddenly those questions are staring you in the face, and you have to figure out how to wrestle with it. And I really appreciated the conversations also that we've had through this network about when we talk about gender and we talk about women, how do we think about that? Who are we inviting in, and how do we make that an inclusive space and move from a place of gender as binary to gender on a spectrum? So it's really been, I know for me at least, a very constructive and strong, network that I can rely on to start talking through some of these questions.
Yeah, and I think, some of the conversations we've had at our Focal Points meeting have really led in this direction. Now, that's one of the other things that we ask gender champions to do, is to identify a focal point who is someone in the organization who is ready to interact with our other focal points as a community, to share best practices, to share successes, to share failures or challenges, to really implement the commitments that the gender champions have made. And one of the things that we've learned in these meetings is that when you start to scratch at the gender diversity issue, you end up opening a whole bunch of other diversities. And so I think it's really important to reflect that we thought about this right up front, but we had no idea how meaningful it would be. And in the principles that underlie the gender champions, there is a commitment to diversity of all types. As you said, gender is the piece that this is aimed at working on, but what it shows is for these organizations that they really start to see a whole range of diversities in which they can do better, and where our field absolutely needs to do better.
So switching gears a little bit, when you mentioned the field, how did you get started on this?
Well, as a child of the Cold War, of the Reagan buildup, of the evil empire and the saber rattling of the 80s, it was really about a movie. The 1983 made-for-TV movie called The Day After showed the harrowing after effects of a nuclear weapon that goes off in Lawrence, Kansas, which, as it turns out, is 20 miles away from where I grew up.
Really?
So
I didn't know that.
That movie literally hit home for me. I was off as a freshman in college, and I called my parents afterwards. I'm like, I know it was a movie, but are you all right?
Oh, no.
And it really galvanized my sense. It really focused what already was a sense of wanting to work in the broader world. I mean, growing up in Kansas City, Not a lot of international relations stuff going on in the 70s there, but my dad was an airline pilot, and so I had exposure to the world beyond Kansas City in a way a lot of my schoolmates didn't, and I really knew that I wanted to work in international something. I just didn't know what. And then coming into my university training, as the nuclear freeze movement was really alive, it was a place that I could put that interest in connecting on a global scale with that very, strong feeling of this is something that could really, destroy the world. And if that's not something worth putting my time and energy in, I don't know what is.
Well, Laura, thank you so much for coming in. You're hearing how you think about these issues, how they are a part of, your nuclear expertise and story and trying to create impactful change and how that's translating as a care for field, a care for organizations and people is something I know I really deeply appreciate. For those who might want to join Gender Champions, what should they do?
Well, it's really easy. The Gender Champion is the head of a structure of an organization or a portion of an organization that works. Some of whose members work on nuclear policy. It doesn't have to be everything that organization does. In TI, our leaders Ernie Moniz and Joan Rolfing are Gender Champions, and we obviously have a very strong bio program, but the Gender Championship mission applies to everybody. So it's the top leader of that organization that makes the commitment, and all we need from that leader is a commitment to the panel pledge to describe the 3 additional pledges that they intend to make. And meet that are specific, measurable, action-oriented, realistic, and time-bound. And then to name a focal point to work with us on a regular basis. We have quarterly meetings. We have regular email exchanges among the focal points to kind of do the arms and legs of the work. And yeah.
And then go to the website.
Send us your information, and look at the other. If you need help and inspiration in figuring out what kinds of pledges you or your boss might make, then take a look at the other pledges that are out there and be inspired.
And with that, thank you for coming in.
Thanks for having me, Michelle.
Thanks for listening to Press the Button. This podcast is produced by Delphine Vigil, Zach Brown, Derek Zender, Alex Spire, and Will Lowry. Sound design by Derek Zender. Audio engineering by Derek Zender and Will Lowry. Research by Alex Spire. Our theme song is by Lyrics Born and the Poets of Rhythm, sampled with kind permission. Additional music by San Francisco-based bands 17 Evergreen and the Society of Rockets. To continue the dialogue and support our work, visit ploughshares.org.